Blog Talk Radio.
The following broadcast is brought to you by the iGolf Sports Network.
Golf Talk Live is sponsored by the iGolf Sports Network and Golf Tips Magazine. Here's Andrew to tell you more about our sponsors.
iGolf Sports is a live stream broadcast and media production company providing quality programming designed to attract the golfing enthusiast. And Golf Tips, the game's most in-depth instruction magazine, including reviews on the latest equipment, tips from top teaching professionals, all designed to help you improve from tee to green. Welcome to Golf Talk Live with your host, Ted Odorico. Join Ted each week as he speaks with some of the best in golf. This week's special guest will join us a bit later. But first up is another great discussion on Coach's Corner. So let's introduce tonight's Coach's Corner panel.
All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Golf Talk Live. I'm your host, Ted Odorico, as you just heard, and very excited to be here another Thursday evening, live on the blogtalkradio.com network, and always excited to do these shows for two reasons. One, I enjoy speaking with some of my fellow professionals and obviously have some interesting guests along the way, but also you guys listening into the show. I know that you've had some of you have reached out over the years and had some questions and things that you'd like to hear on the program, and I'm always trying to do my best to accommodate you whenever and wherever possible, so I will continue to do that. But I want to thank you guys for tuning in live, and for those of you that obviously will listen a little bit later, the best way to do that obviously is to go to blogtalkradio.com/golftalklive, and you can just scroll down to the on-demand section and listen to the recorded version when it's convenient for you. But again, for those of you joining me live, thank you, and I'm going to introduce the Coach's Corner panel here in just a little bit, in just a second or two. But a little bit later, my special guest is going to be Terry Koehler. He's the chairman and director of innovation at Edison Golf, and he's going to come on and talk about their wedges and some interesting stuff going on in 2023 here at Edison Golf. So he's going to come on a little bit later on the program. All right, let me introduce the panel, and we'll get into tonight's discussion. First up, of course, is John Decker, become a regular on the program over the years. He is the director of instruction at the Medallion Club up in Columbus, Ohio, and you'll find him there now, giving some great lessons. He's also senior editor and top 25 instructor at Golf Tips Magazine. He was a former head instructor at the Grand Cypress Academy of Golf in Orlando and the 2015 Southern Ohio Teacher of the Year. And he's also authored, his first book was Golf is My Life, Glorifying God Through the Game, which of course includes accompanying Bible study. He's also a public speaker, and he's been working on his second book, which I'll let him tell you a little bit about that later on in the broadcast. Also joining on the show, become a regular this season, and glad to have him back, is Jim Endicott. He's been teaching this great game of golf for 38 years. He's a former general manager for Golf Digest Schools and a 7-time PGA Award winner, including the 2022 North Florida PGA Sections Patriot Award and also 2 North Florida PGA Youth Development Awards. And currently he is the director of instruction at Royal St. Cloud Golf Links in St. Cloud, Florida. So, gentlemen, welcome to Coach's Corner here on Golf Talk Live.
Thank you, Ted.
Thank you, Ted. It's great to be here.
All right, appreciate it. And just a quick side note before we start. So, Jim, you're in, Arizona, you said?
I am. I'm in Phoenix. My son, his college team made the national championship for NAIA golf, and they are now they just finished their third round, poised for round number 4 tomorrow.
Well, very good. So you're there on the sidelines cheering him on, and we wish him all the best and his team as well. So, so we're going to talk about course management on the show. I know we've touched on this before, but I've got some interesting perspectives that we're going to discuss tonight. There's a number of them here. We'll try to get through all of them if we can. So, obviously, while concentrating on the basics is important, but your course management ability is what really significantly can impact your game. So here are some golf management tips that will basically tell you all you need to know. And John, I'm going to start with you, and this is going to be when people first hear this one here, and I'm sure you will probably feel the same, are going to find a little bit odd, but when you understand the premise of it, it'll make perfect sense. And the first one is stop working on your swing. And as I said, what I mean by that is many of our students, amateur golfers out there, focus intently all the time on their swing and very little else. And sometimes it can be a detriment as well as even a curse. Talk a little bit about that. Obviously, it's important. We don't mean it literally. We want people to obviously be working on their swing and that, but they can also go the other way and spend too much time on that and maybe not other areas that could be beneficial. Give us your thoughts here.
Well, Ted, thanks again for having me on the show. And, Jim, I look forward to being on with you tonight as well. You bring up a very great point about the transition from taking what we learn on the driving range and being able to apply it out on the golf course. And a lot of times I see students hit the ball beautifully on the driving range, and I know that I've gone through this myself. And you think to them, you think this person is really going to be able to take this out on the golf course. And then when they get on the golf course, they're not playing the golf course. They're playing their golf swing. They are playing what they're used to having, maybe a bucket of balls in front of them. You've got an alignment stick down, you got a flag, and you just keep hitting shot after shot after shot on the driving range, and you kind of get into a groove. You don't get that out on the golf course. And so one of the things for the listeners out there I would really encourage you to do is to work on your pre-shot routine when you're on the driving range, and then try to actually play golf on the driving range so that you can have that transition of what you're learning technically, because what you're learning technically from your instructor, whether it's your grip or ball position or anything that you're doing to change your golf swing, is important, and there's a time for that. But there's also, you have to transition from that, what you're learning mechanically, and transition that to the golf course. And so one way to kind of bridge that gap is to spend time, go to the range and say, I'm going to go to the range today, and I'm not going to focus on anything but playing golf, even though I'm on the driving range, and just play 9 holes in your mind, tee it up and play the first hole. And if you hit it off, if you hit it down the middle of the fairway and you're 150 yards away from the green, go to the club that you would use and play that way, so that you're kind of getting yourself used to going through your routine, checking your yardages, the wind, all the factors that you would, be dealing with on the golf course. So I think that's a great way to prepare to then take what you're learning mechanically and then to be able to take it out on the golf course. And then the last thing that I would say on this is I'm a big believer in the timing of the golf swing. So what I do is I'm always working on my count. And what I mean by that is the time that it takes me to go back into the ball. And so that's 1 second. So I'm always doing a count where I'm 1, 2, 1, 2, and I'm doing that in my head. So I'm not thinking so much about my mechanics. I'm thinking more about my tempo.
Well said, and literally hit it right on the mark. And that's really what I was looking for is, obviously in realistic terms, you have to work on your swing. You're always, the best players in the world are always working on their swing, but they pick the appropriate times to do that, and not when they get out on the golf course and they're actually playing it around. They don't start tinkering and monkeying around, even if they're not playing at their best. Obviously, there may be some subtle changes from playing a lot they're able to make on the fly, but they're not making any drastic changes, and they're not really thinking about their golf swing per se when they're out there. So I think that's a great way that you put it to hopefully help people understand what I meant by that first course management tip. Jim, I'm going to come to you on this one here, and this is one that I think a lot of pros certainly have adopted over the years, and that is really sort of developing an ability to work your way back on each hole. So instead of thinking from tee to green, we're now going to sort of change the mindset and work from green back to the tee. There's a reason why that can be very effective if implemented correctly. Give us your thoughts here. What do we need to be thinking about when we step up to that hole and we see, let's say it's a 435-yard par 4? What do we need to be focusing on here while we're adapting this new course management tip? Jim, I'm not sure if you
I apologize.
heard that or
I had
not.
my mute on.
No, that's go ahead. Did you heard the question okay, though?
Yes, I did. What I like to do is if the course permits and their time permits, to go out on the golf course and go backwards. In other words, ride the golf course backwards. Go to the green, stand there and look out to the fairway down to the tee versus tee to green. And you start to see areas where you can play your shots to, and then reverse that process and go tee to green, trying to find those locations you saw from the green. And it helps a lot right around the green because you can see where is the easiest place. If you happen to miss the green, where can you get it up and down from? I know at the golf course I'm at, probably 20 out of the 27 holes, if you're over the green, it's an easier up and down than if you're short of the green. And so you learn where you can go and maybe be a little bit longer and that sort of a thing. So I like to look at it from – go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead. Finish your thought.
I like to look at it from where I'm headed and then go back and head there, if you will.
Yeah, and that's a great point as well. And I like the fact, again, obviously, usually you can work something out maybe later in the day when it's not as busy, before maybe the day before you're going to play, is or even during the day if again you're not interfering with anybody, but to drive back from green to tee and on the course and kind of get a lay of the land, because it does look a lot different. If you ever, for some of the amateurs out there, and I'm sure we've all experienced this when we've played, but if you ever get out there, whether you're in the fairway or on the green, and you look back the hole, it looks a lot different. I mean, it looks completely different. And there's things that you don't notice, as you pointed out, sometimes from the tee. Sometimes the undulation of the fairway can confuse the eye a little bit, and maybe a landing area that maybe from the tee doesn't look so big suddenly looks a lot wider and more forgiving when you look at from the green's perspective. So I think that's a great point. And again, whenever possible, I agree with you. I think if you can get out there and kind of drive backwards through the course, gives you a better understanding of what the holes look like from that perspective as well. And it may help you in some of your decision-making when you get back on the tee. So great point. John, on this one here, I'm going to come back to you on, and this sort of, from what Jim just mentioned, kind of helps with a little of this as well. And that is to really know the course, really familiarize with the course, where the hazards and some of the potential troubles might be. This is an important part of course management as well, right?
No doubt about it. The first thing that I do, like if I go to a golf course for the first time, let's say that I'm going to play in a tournament there, and I want to go play a practice round. The first thing that I do when I get to the golf course is I obviously want to know the speed of the greens and kind of the layout. Maybe look at it online if you can to get an idea and feel for it. But it's important that when you get there, on each hole, you figure out where you can't go. In other words, when you're standing on the tee, you say, okay, on this hole, I cannot go right or I cannot miss it left because of water out of bounds, whatever it is. And then by doing that, you kind of set your game plan from there. And so I think that's very important when you're looking at any hole, and especially when you're not swinging well. It's a lot easier to play golf, obviously, when you're playing well. When I'm hitting the ball well, it's amazing how I don't see nearly as much of the problems out there on the golf course than when I'm not hitting it well. And what good players will do, because if you're in the middle of a round and you're not hitting it well, you still have to finish that round. So what you have to do is you have to be able to take trouble out of play. And a simple way to do this, for example, is if you stand on the tee box and the trouble is on the right-hand side of the tee, on the right-hand side of the hole, you want to tee it up on the right-hand side of the tee box. And by doing that, you can get your body to aim more down the left-hand side. If you stand on a tee box and the trouble is on the left-hand side, then teeing up on the left-hand side will help eliminate the left side, will get you to aim more of the right side. basically by teeing up on the left, you open up the right. By teeing up on the right, you open up the left side. And so those are simple ways that you can, avoid trouble. Then knowing when you're out there on the golf course, knowing on your par fives especially, your layup, where you want to lay up. That's something that's important as well, because a lot of times the architects will put trouble in those layup areas. They'll have these bunkers that are, 40 or 50 yards away from the green. And, a lot of players make the mistake when they're out there on the par fives, I'm just going to hit my 3-wood down there and get as close as I can to the green. And then they get in one of these bunkers and they've got a 40 or 50-yard bunker shot, which is just, you're dead if you're in that kind of position. You're going to be, just trying to get out and go from there. So knowing, okay, I don't want to try to push it down there and give myself a 50-yard bunker shot. I'm going to lay it back to 100 or 120 or 130, whatever it is, so that you can eliminate that. So good players will eliminate a lot of the trouble just in their course management skills. So that's why if you see a tour player in trouble, it's because they've made a bad swing. It's not because they've usually made a course management mistake, because they know the golf course, they have a caddy there, and they're smart enough to know, okay, I'm not playing my A game today. I'm going to miss it. Instead of, like Jim was saying, I'm on this hole, I'm going to miss it long because I'm going to have an easier up and down. So those are examples of ways that players can avoid high numbers on the golf course especially when they're not swinging well, just through course management.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And Jim, this is this next one here is one, with the advancement of technology, particularly nowadays. It's gotten so good, the GPS devices. So, there's really no excuse while using this to not know your yardages, not just to the pin, but to the front of the green, to the back of the green. I mean, these laser rangefinders, for instance, are so accurate now and so easy to set up and use that they give us a wealth of information. So, and most, I won't say all, but a good many tournaments now are certainly allowing you to use them even in tournament play. They're starting to open that up quite a bit. So give us the scoop on that. GPS, how can we make that our friend?
Well, many golf carts have the GPS, and even to the point where you can touch the screen and find out exactly how far you are, perhaps to a pond or a bunker. And there's apps for your phone that can do the same thing. And so you could stand on the tee and look at your phone and point to where the water is on the GPS and know that it's maybe 220 yards. Well, if your driver goes 230, now you just brought that into play. So you may look at it and say, you know what, I'm going to hit this 200. And so instead of having, say, 140 into the green, you might have 170, but you've taken that water completely out of play, and it's not now a hazard to you because you can't get to that by hitting a club that lays you back that extra yardage. So they are wonderful tools to give you decisions, and we've got to go back to the idea. I think we talked about this in a previous show, and that is that golf is a game of hitting your golf ball a certain distance at a certain target. And so it's not that maximum distance all the time. And so using that GPS, you can stand there in the fairway on a par 5 and go, okay, I am now 230 yards, and my 3-wood goes 210 yards. Well, it's a 2-shot situation now. You're never going to get it 230. So let's look at it and divide it up in a way that you have a great chance to hit good shots, and those shots are going to go into a place that an obstacle or a hazard isn't in the way. As John mentioned, you're going to lay it before you get to that bunker, and now you have 110 versus trying to get it up there as close as you can, and now you bring those hazards in, and that's where big numbers come from. So it's a great tool to have to be able to determine how far do I need to hit this shot at which target?
Yeah, and again, some great points. And the other thing, too, is that I want to mention about some of these, and again, you can add other, apps and that in there, as you mentioned, Jim. But what's really unique about some of the current technology out there is the ability to actually record your stats. So, for instance, there's different devices out there that can, whether through the app or through some other technology, when you're on the golf course, so as you're playing various different rounds, it's recording that. And what's really nice about it is a lot of these new apps will actually, if you get in a situation, let's say you've got 150 yards, based on your history, now it may not necessarily be applicable for that particular day because obviously it's a new day, but it can give you an approximate idea of what club selection to use as well. So there's a lot of benefits to that technology when used properly, but you've got to take full advantage of it, leading up to that, so that when it's there, it's giving you not just the information of the yardages as we've discussed, but it's giving you other valuable information, possibly club selection and whatnot, or recommendations, if you will, based on past track records. So whenever possible, if you're using that technology, make sure you understand it. Speak to your pro, and if your pros, maybe it's something a little bit newer technology that they're not familiar with, maybe together you guys can investigate it and make use of it, because it's an ever-changing world, and this technology is there to help you when used properly. So I think it's a great opportunity and a great tool to use to add to that course management side of things. John, this one, I know we've kind of touched on this a little bit already tonight, so I think I'm just going to pass by. But off the tee, obviously the tee shot is one that sort of sets the tone of the hole. If we have a good tee shot, we put it in the position to place the distance that we want, then that's going to help set us up for our next shot. Anything you want to add to that?
Well, as far as course management goes, I want the listeners out there to understand that you don't always have to hit the driver off the tee, especially on par fours and even par fives. I have a story with a kid that I work with who's in the 8th grade, and most 8th graders, they're just like most adults, want to hit the driver as far as they can. When we were playing a hole that was a hole that he can't physically get it there in 2 shots, even if he hit his very best 2 shots. And he came walking up on the tee box, and he had a 5-wood. And I kind of looked at him, and I said, why are you hitting a 5-wood? And he said, well, it's my favorite club. And I was like, all right, but this is a long hole. But he said, I can't get it there in 2 shots, so I might as well get the ball in play, then hit a second shot, and then leave it for my wedge, which he loves, the 100-yard wedge shot. And so I thought for an 8th grader, that's pretty darn good, because most kids would never have the forethought to think about breaking a hole down like that. And I was really amazed with his maturity. And so we can all learn from that. A lot of times on par 5, if I get on a par 5, especially when I was playing competitively, if I got on a par 5 that was 650 yards where I knew that there was no way I could get there in 2 shots, what I would do a lot of times is I would hit 3-wood off the tee, because I felt more comfortable with my 3-wood than I did my driver, especially if the hole had some trouble or the hole didn't set up to my eye. So, breaking the hole down, if you have a hybrid or you have a 7-wood or 5-wood or something like that, and you're not swinging well, or it's a hole that maybe it's going to take you 3 shots to get there anyway, that's a great way to play. You don't always have to hit driver off the tee.
Yeah, exactly. And that is just want to add to what you said about the player. For somebody that young to have that, the wherewithal to understand that. And you're right. A lot of our older, even senior golfers, still haven't learned to put the ego, leave it back at the pro shop or what have you, or in the car and deal with it when you get back. But that's some great advice to give, is to really focus on, how can I best play this hole? What's going to give me yield the highest result and best result that I'm looking for, rather than just letting ego play in a factor here. Jim, this is one here that I think can have some interesting feedback on, and that is really to be able to use the green to your advantage. A lot of players, much like they do with the driver, get it in their mind, I'm just going to go for this pin, but sometimes based on the undulation of the green and how the pin's set up, that may not be the best course of action. Give us some thoughts here on how we can use a green to our advantage when we're playing a hole.
Well, I think you have to first look at your skill set. And at a certain level of skill, the middle of the green is really the target they should be going for, regardless of whether the flag is to the right, to the left, to the back, or to the front. Most greens, if you walked out there and stood precisely in the middle, most greens you would find that if your ball was there in the middle, you would have no more than a 35-foot putt to any hole location on that green. So at a certain skill level, that needs to be our decision. Now, when that flag becomes one in the front or the back versus the middle, and let's say we're a better player, now we need to decide where we want to be relative to that flag. And I advise on most occasions that if, let's say, for example, the flag is in the front and it's 120 yards from where you're hitting, you may want to play that 105 yards. I'm sorry, 125. So you add 5 yards to it, so now you've put it 15 feet past the hole. Then if you happen to hit it not precise, it's still okay. And then if you put the flag in the back of the green, and perhaps it's 140 yards to that flag, maybe you're going to go at 135 because there's a big drop-off behind that green and it's really difficult up and down. So now we'll leave it 5 yards short of that flag. And if you happen to put it there, you're only 15 feet away from the hole. So we can decide where our yardage should be based on that flag being front or back. And the other thing, if that flag is tucked to the right and you hit towards the middle and that ball happens to drift a little bit to the right, you look like a hero. But if you hit it to the middle and you've got maybe a 20-foot putt. So that middle area of the green is really, for many and most players, what you want to be shooting for.
Yeah, and again, some great points. And also, too, by going for the middle of the green, a lot of times, depending on how the green is as I said, the undulations, you're usually pretty safe because even if it, I've even seen some greenskeepers where if there's a slope right from the middle, let's say to the front, I've even seen some nasty greenkeepers actually put that pin right on top of that shelf, right near where that undulation happens, so that you've either got to hit it on top or you've got to hit it just below. But if you try to go for the pin, it'll just feed right back to the front and sometimes even roll off the green. So playing by that analogy of sort of going for the center of the green, again, gives you more room for error in the event, like you said, if you leak a little bit right or left, depending on your situation. It still gives you plenty of green in most cases to work with, and it certainly increases the likelihood of you getting, either maybe potentially getting a birdie or at least saving par. So it's definitely some words to live by. John, another aspect, sort of feeding along the same area of the greens, and that is, as we all know, you don't always make it on the green every time, but you need to have to be able to work around the green. So learning to work around the greens, obviously short pitch shots, chip shots, that sort of thing, that's something that we really need to work on, I think, all times, because, again, we're not going to hit every green. Give us your thoughts here.
Well, I think that, for me, I believe, and I've been taught, and I think most instructors would agree with me, that it's always easier to play the ball low than it is high. And so, to me, chipping is kind of the lost art in today's game of golf. It seems like everybody wants to grab their lob wedge or their sand wedge. Everyone wants to fly the ball to the hole, which is a very difficult way to play all your shots. Now, obviously, if I've got to go over a bunker, I've got to use a lob wedge or a sand wedge. I'm not going to use a 7-iron to hit a short, shot over a bunker in that situation. But let's say that there's no obstacle in front of us and we're not in the primary rough, okay? So if we're not in those situations, it's always easier to hit the low shot. And learning how to hit a low pitch and run or a low chip shot or to lower, the trajectory of a sand wedge so it's coming in and hitting and kind of releasing. That is a very important part of the game to work on because you can't always putt from off the green. I know a lot of listeners out there will just simply pull their putter out, but you don't want to be putting, in most cases if you're in the intermediate rough and you've got a lot of things in front of you, sprinkler heads, things like that. You've got to learn how to hit different shots. So I'm always a big believer when you're practicing is that you put yourself in situations. Yeah, you want to practice the shots over the bunker and things like that, but you also want to practice the shots I call the vanilla shots, the real basic shots where you're 2 or 3 yards off of the green. You've got 25 to 30 feet of green to work with. I see more people practicing the difficult shots, and they don't practice the vanilla shots, the real basic shots. And if you think about it statistically, if you put me and I've got to hit a flop shot or a pitch shot over a bunker, I'm not expecting to get that up and down. I'm trying to get it down in 3 shots. But if you put me 3 or 4 yards off the green and you give me 25 or 30 feet of green to work with, now my expectations change. And so what frustrates me as a player is when I can't hit those real basic easy shots well because I haven't been working on them. So I think that's something that I would challenge all of the listeners out there to do is to try to put time into working on those real basic shots, learning how to use pitching wedges, 9-irons, 8-irons, where you've got some shots where you just pitch it on the green and you let it release 20, 30, 40, 50 feet, depending on the situation. Learning how to use different clubs, I think that is a great way to spend your time. I don't see enough of that when I go out to our club and when I go to other clubs. I don't see that. I see people either just putting or they're hitting the high shots. They're not hitting the lower shots. And in my opinion, that's something that would really help a lot of players out there.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Well said. And I'm just going to add this in real quick, and then, Jim, I'll move on to the next one. I think, too, mainly for our really any player, but particularly our high handicappers, is you want to avoid the short side of the green. And what we mean by that is that's the part of the green that's closest to the pin. So if the pin is cut, say, close to the right side of the green, that's that little patch of green from the right side to where the pin is. And it doesn't give you a lot of room, especially even with your working with your chip shots and things like that. It doesn't give you a lot of green to work with. So whenever possible, if you see a pin that's cut, real close to one side or the other, you want to avoid that short side because that's not going to give you a lot to work with. And this sort of defaults back to, Jim, what you were talking about earlier, and that is really sort of using the green to your advantage. So I just wanted to throw that in there so we can sort of wrap that up, talking about around the green. Avoiding the short side is going to make things a little bit easier for you as well. So, Jim, I'm going to give you this one here. And, again, I just want to clarify a couple things just so that we make sure everybody understands. I think another thing, too, is in preparation for part of our course management is we want to think 2 shots ahead. So, for an example, if we're playing on a par 5, we want to think about the next shot and even the shot after. That may make a different decision in what we're going to do now. And that doesn't mean that we don't stay in the moment and worry about the particular shot at hand, but we want to be conscious of what it is we want to do. So maybe you can sort of talk a little bit more about that and what I mean by thinking sort of 2 shots ahead.
Yeah, I think we have to look, and I always go back to our skill set. What is our skill? What can we do? And sometimes I like to break down that hole, say, okay, this is a hole that I can hit this golf ball 2 times and get to the green. And now I need to make the decision, and again, going back to the GPS, I can make the decision where should that first one be so that I'm set up to hit the next one to the middle of the green. And so now I'm already planned how I'm going to hit it to the middle of the green, which now is setting me up to have a good putt at a birdie. But now if I'm a person that I get to that par 4 hole and my skill set is such that it's going to take me 3 hits to get to that green, I can't get there in 2. Now I'm going to take that yardage and I'm going to divide it by 3. And so now I'm going to make the decision, okay, what do I want to have as a distance to hit onto the green? And perhaps I want that to be 100 yards, and I'm on a 400-yard hole. Well, that means I've got to hit 2 shots, 300 yards to get to 100 for my last shot to the green. Now I have to make my plan around getting to that 100 yards to the green. And so it always comes back to your skill set. You know, the better players, we're looking at it that way on a par 5. The higher handicap, maybe we're looking at it that way on a par 4. And even all the way back to a par 3. Depending on our skill, we may be talking to ourselves saying, you know what, this is a long par 3. It's 200 yards. And my absolute very best 3-wood goes 200 yards. Well, maybe I had to hit a couple shots 100 yards and get to that green and make sure that I have a chance at par or, at worst, 2-putt for a bogey.
Yeah, and again, it all, you know, comes back to this course management. You know, what's always really interesting is, you know, when you see guys like Jack Nicklaus in his day and obviously Tiger, you know, they certainly didn't hit every shot perfectly, but their course management and how they handled themselves around the golf course made up for a myriad of you know, issues that they may have, you know, arisen in a round. And whether it was a poor putt or what have you, or miscalculation, which didn't happen as much as what you might think, but they were always prepared with whatever they're doing. And they're always thinking, you know, when you listen to them explaining, you know, what they were doing on a particular hole, they would always talk about, you know, I was thinking this, and that's why I put myself in this position. And, you know, I wanted to make sure that I got up and down and, you know, or whatever the case was. So they were always thinking ahead. But then they would focus on the shot at hand when it came down to it. But they always knew or had a game plan, if you will, as to how they were going to play that particular hole. And that's why they were both so successful in their careers. And they did it better, really, than most of the other golfers out on tour. John, this is another one, too, and this sort of plays in with the course conditions. I'm not talking so much about bunkers per se or that or hazards. We've touched on that. But depending on where you're playing, whether you're playing in Florida, maybe out in Arizona where Jim is, or up where you are up in Ohio, you're playing different course conditions. So that has to be an important factor as well when you're sort of deciding how you're going to play that particular course, and as you develop a golf course strategy, management strategy for that particular round. Touch on that a little bit. I think there's some things that people need to consider about the course conditions.
Well, course conditions are very important. For example, if you like to travel, you know, like, for example, a lot of our people that live here in Ohio, obviously they winter either down in Florida or they vacation out California, Arizona, places like that. If you're traveling to different parts of the country and playing on different grasses than you're used to, you know, course conditions can be totally different. You see this all the time. With players who really, you know, again, like to get out and play different courses. So the first thing that I do is I go to the practice green, because the practice green will give me an idea of the speed of the green. So the first thing I ask myself when I get there is I'll hit some long lag putts. I'll get 30 feet from the fringe, and I'll just try to roll the ball to the fringe. I try to find a relatively level part of the green, and I just try to roll balls to the fringe. And then I ask myself, these greens are going to be either, you know, faster or slower than what I'm used to in most cases. Very rarely are they just the same. They're always a little bit different. And that's going to dictate a lot of what goes on during my round. For example, if I get there and the greens are faster, I am going to put more of a premium on staying below the hole. So that's going to be very important to me when I'm chipping, when I'm hitting pitch shots, approach shots. I'm going to make sure that I'm not leaving myself a lot of downhill putts. I'm going to do the best I can with that. Other course conditions could be you could get to the golf course at your home course and it could be drizzling. Well, the greens are going to be slower. The golf course is going to play longer. If it's cart path only, you know that you're going to be in for a long day out there on the golf course. You're going to have to play a lot smarter. You're going to have to realize that maybe you're not going to hit as many greens. You're not going to hit it as far. If it's cart path only, I can promise you're not going to hit it as far as you would if it was a really dry day. If it's windy, wind is, to me, the most difficult thing to play in. Wind and cold are the two that I can't stand the most when they're really extreme. Because, if it's colder, your ball's not going to go as far. If it's windy, you've got to understand that maybe a wind that's blowing left to right, and if you have a fade, it's going to turn your fade into a slice. So you've got all kind of conditions that you can deal with, and you can never prepare for all of them, because in golf things happen, weather changes, but weather is such a big part of golf. And, depending on the weather in the morning can be totally different than the weather in the afternoon. So learning and having the experience to know that when these conditions happen, when it's cold or when it's windy or when it's wet, you're going to lose distance in a lot of cases. When it's dry and when the ground's hard and firm, you're going to gain distance. The ball might roll into places you've never been before on the golf course. So that's where the experience factor comes in. And so it's important that when you're playing the golf course, I start with the putting green. The putting green speed tells me everything that hopefully tells me what I'm going to be dealing with when I get out on the golf course.
Yeah, I think it's great to go out and do a warm-up, which is important, but it's also an opportunity, and I'm talking about before you round, I'm not talking about a sort of a full-blown practice session, but if you're getting ready to play, that's why I always like for people to show up at a good time. Obviously, sometimes there are situations where it's a last-minute decision to get out and maybe play a quick 9, so you may not have the luxury. But if you know ahead of time, let's say you're playing this Saturday, you're going to be going there, and you've gotten all your chores, your spouse is giving you all the work, maybe try to do it Friday night so you can get out a little earlier on the golf course and give you a chance to really assess the situation, get an idea of what the wind is going to be like for that day. Don't always listen to the weatherman, because sometimes, as we know, they're wrong. But if it's, as you said, if it's been drizzling and that, and just give yourself a few minutes while you're warming up to kind of assess the situation on the green, and also just, how the ball is handling itself when you're hitting it out into the range. Is it just sort of plug in real quick, or is it getting some bounce? Maybe the ground is dry and hard, and depending where you're playing, that could be factored in. So those are things that you need to understand. Jim, this is one here that I think that I could really put this in two categories, and that is to have a yardage you can hit confidently. I like to call this sometimes, too, a go-to shot. A lot of times maybe our full swing is, with the driver is not our best, and, we can certainly scale back. But sometimes I like to have a go-to shot where I know the exact yardage I'm going to hit with a specific club. If I need to keep it in play, a lot of times Tiger had that with his 2-iron, his Stinger. If he wanted to play certain holes, he would do that. I think that's a good idea. What are your thoughts here? And is this something, again, obviously it falls into skill level, but I think this is something that all levels can work on over time to develop a sort of a go-to shot where they can hit confidently specific yardage.
Well, I think it's important to look at that kind of in a couple ways. One, what is your go-to favorite, if you will, yardage going into the green? What do I do my best with? Is that a 100-yard shot? Is that a 70-yard shot? Is that 120? And so to know that, then we can make our plan from the tee to that area to get to that go-to yardage into the green, so I have my confidence and my success rate is elevated. But now going back to off of the tee, we need to look at it and say, okay, what club is it? The idea of the tee shot is to hit the ball as far down the fairway as we can. The key there is down the fairway. And if that for you is you've got a very narrow situation. You've got trees on the left and water on the right. Now you may be saying, you know what? My 5-iron I know is going to go into that location. I can get that into the middle of the fairway. Well, that 5-iron might leave me with 2 more shots to get to the green. Well, that's a whole lot better than trying that driver and hitting it into the water, taking a penalty, and then hitting another one because now you're frustrated. You lost the ball. You've added a shot, and now you probably don't perform as well. So having that like you said, Tiger had the 2-iron stinger, have that club that you know you can put in the fairway no matter what, I think is very important. And you need to understand that and how far that shot goes.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was getting at. I think that a lot of people, sort of second guess their play. They don't really have that, and that's I call that sort of special club in the bag, and it might be any club. It's not necessarily one specific iron, but it's a go-to shot that whenever you're in a tight spot, you can play that shot with confidence, get yourself in fairway, or put yourself to that yardage that you need to be at. And I see so many people wasting time, on the range. I'm going to try, weather permitting, I'm going to try to get up this weekend myself and just hit some balls. And when I do that, I always like to look up and down the range and just kind of see what people are doing. And it's amazing how, what I don't see is this, and I know we've talked about this many times. I don't see anybody going through their pre-shot routine. Almost nobody. Maybe a few juniors if they're up there getting ready to play for an event. Coming up, they'll be working on all aspects. But I don't see them working on their pre-shot routine. I don't see them taking time between each shot, not just to go through the routine, but just to give themselves a break. They're just raking and hitting. So, I like to see people working on things that they don't normally work on all the time, because you never know what you might need out in the golf course. It's a mixed bag, and there's a club for every shot and every situation out there, but you have to be able to put a little thought into it, and that falls into what we're talking about here tonight. And the last one, John, and I think this sort of sums up everything we've been talking about, and that is to really play to your strengths. Give us your final thoughts on that, and then, Jim, I'll allow you to also any final thoughts, and then I'll close it out.
Well, I think that's a great point, knowing your strengths. First of all, you have to know your strengths. And so the best way to know your strengths is by keeping your stats, knowing if you're, what your stats are, how good you are from, say, 100 yards, and then having that go-to yardage like Jim was talking about, having that would be one thing. Knowing whether you're, pitching or chipping, all of these factors that you have in the short game, knowing where your strengths are, so that when the pin is on the right-hand side of the green and you have no green to work with, if you're not, and there's a bunker over there, if you're not a good bunker player, you've got to make sure and keep that ball left of the hole. You can't run the risk of short-sighting yourself and going in that. So knowing how to play around the trouble. In golf with beginners, we teach beginners to go around trouble. The better you get as a golfer, the more you go over trouble. But even tour players will go around trouble, especially when they're out of position off the tee. They haven't hit an ideal tee shot, so they know how to go around the trouble in those situations. And then knowing your strengths off the tee. I think off the tee is the one area that everyone has to have a firm grasp of what they're good with. They have to have confidence that the driver or the 3-wood or the 4-wood, whatever it is that you tee off with, or the hybrid on the really tight holes, that you know that when you put that in your hands, that you have the confidence that you can get the ball in play. And I've always said the number one objective is to get the ball in play when you're off the tee. You want to get it in play. You want to get it as far down the fairway as possible. So those are all things that you can do in playing towards your strengths.
Well said. And Jim, final thought, I guess point I want you to touch on a little bit is for those golfers, and there are many of them out there who, are going to wake up maybe this weekend and are excited to get out on the golf course with their buddies and play. And, beautiful sunny day, hopefully, and the weather conditions are perfect. And they show up there, and during their warm-up session, suddenly the wheels have just sort of fallen off the bus. They just don't have their A game, B game hasn't shown up, and even their C game is not there. And really they have two choices. They can bail out on their friends and just, go back home and wait for the next time. Or maybe they can do what? If they're not playing at their best, how can they adapt to the game that they've got? What can they do? What are some things that you could advise a golfer that runs into that scenario? Because I guarantee it, there's going to be a few of them this weekend coming up.
Well, I think what happens so often when it's just not working in warm-up is we get very involved in how do I swing this to make myself hit it better. And on contrary to that, we actually do a better job if we step back, take a breath, and go into our routine and think about the target. So, for example, if we were playing catch with a ball, we wouldn't necessarily be thinking about how we're going to release our wrists and fingers as we toss the ball to each other. We need to play golf that way. And if the golf swing isn't quite working, if we can get channeled into and focused into the target where I want to make this ball go, it's amazing how our body will start to make that happen. And then what we may need to do is back ourselves down. Everybody, as John was saying, the young man, the 8th grader, had his favorite club, the 5-wood. Go to that favorite club on the range, but focus on the target, not on the actions. And they'll be amazed at how the actions start to evolve and become what you want. And on that range, I would put that ball on a tee in a good position and just, again, start focusing on where I want the ball to go. Now, when they now go to the golf course, they have to have a mindset that I'm not going to be so focused on my technique. I may have a swing thought in pre-shot routine in a rehearsal swing, but when I get ready to hit, I've got to get to where I'm going to hit to the target. And we may be more conservative on our decisions. As John said, we got to hit that ball in play off the tee. Well, what today is going to get my ball in play? Who knows? Maybe that's a 7-iron to get it off the tee and in play. And as they start seeing the ball perform and they get it into play, their confidence comes, their skill comes. They can rely more on the target, and it's kind of a snowball effect to recover by thinking, I want it to go there. Let me see how I can make it go there, versus I need to have my club in this position at this point in my golf swing in order to make it go there. Get target oriented when you struggle a lot, perhaps a swing thought in routine, but stay in the target when they hit and be conservative when they go play.
Again, some very great, poignant things to help golfers to become better. And, going to the very first point we talked about, not always working on your swing, developing, a good course management strategy is going to help you overcome a lot of obstacles that you may be faced with. I mean, it's very tempting, obviously, to try and bomb it off the tee every time, but that's usually not the best way to play golf. I think having a good course management strategy is extremely important, especially for you beginners out there or those of you that are still maybe struggling to shoot below 100. If you're not breaking 100, you can work on your swing all day long, but if you don't have a good strategy out there in the golf course, and I think the best way to really improve at golf is to first build your confidence and mental game. Remembering golf is really about consistency and minimizing as many variables as possible. So having a solid and repeatable plan for how you tackle a course is how you get better. And by doing that, you'll enjoy the game a lot more, even when you're not striking every shot as pure as you'd like. So, guys, some great discussion tonight. I think we hit everything on the mark, and hopefully we'll help a few golfers out there. And for those of you that are listening live, obviously we got a little bit more show to go here, another hour. But what I would recommend is if you joined in late or you want to hear those again, you can go to blogtalkradio.com/golftalklive. And at the end of the show, the recorded version will be there, and you can listen to that first half that we've just done and pick up some of those points again if you missed some of them or you want to hear them again. I strongly suggest you do that because there's some good information in there for everybody to pick up on to manage your game a little bit better on the golf course. Guys, as always, you did a great job. I appreciate you giving of your time, and as I always do, give each of you an opportunity to not only let the folks know the best way they can reach out, but also if there's anything quickly that you'd like to plug as well coming up, by all means, go ahead. John, you go first.
Well, Ted, thanks again for having me on the show. And Jim, I really enjoyed being on tonight's episode with you. For the listeners out there, one of the best ways to connect with me is to go to my website, deckergolf.com. You can also follow me on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn. My book, Golf is My Life, Glorifying God Through the Game, is available on Amazon Audible. It's an Audible book now as well. Purchase it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Walmart.com. And I've got a second book that hopefully will be out sometime next year, and it's going to be called Fairways to Heaven, One Shot at a Time, so I'm really excited about that. And I really enjoy working with Golf Tips Magazine, and you can also, I do a lot of instructional videos and articles for the magazine, and also my Fairways to Heaven article is in the magazine as well. So if you're hopefully a Golf Tips Magazine subscriber, you can go on and keep up with me there as well. And if you're interested in having me come as a public speaker, I do public speaking. I can do it at your golf course, your church, juniors, things along those lines. So golf outings, I've done a lot of those through my career, and would enjoy coming to your community and hopefully offering something maybe unique that you haven't done in the past. But Ted, thanks again for all that you do for us, giving us this platform, and really appreciate it. And Jim, I hope your son plays well, and the team does well during the tournament.
Thanks so much,
Thank
John.
you.
And yes, it was great to be on with you as well, John. I think it was our first show together. And for those listeners who would like to reach out to me, you can reach me via email at jim@endicottgolf.com or on my website at royalstcloudacademy.com. And Ted, as always, thank you so much for having me a part of this, and I look forward to future shows.
Do as well. Thank you both again for always giving of your time and always bringing your best to the panel discussions. And I concur with John in encouraging your son and the team to get out there and have a great event and obviously get to spend some quality time with his dad. So Jim, thank you very much, and John as well. And I'll see you guys next time on the Coach's Corner panel. Have a great weekend, guys.
Thanks so much. Take care.
All right, that was John Decker and Jim Endicott joining me on the Coach's Corner panel. We're going to take a quick break as we wait for our special guest, Terry Koehler, Chairman and Director of Innovation at Edison Golf, is going to be joining me here in just a moment or two. But in the meantime, speaking of Golf Tips Magazine, here's a quick message on how you can subscribe and what you can get.
The following ad is sponsored by Golf Tips Magazine.
Are you tired of being short off the tee? And what about those 3 putts? Forget about it. It's time you got serious about your game. Golf Tips, the most in-depth magazine in the industry. For over 30 years, Golf Tips has delivered expert content such as the latest golf instruction from America's top pros, simple to follow practice and game improvement drills, fitness and mental game tips, equipment, training aids, accessory and apparel reviews, golf destinations and travel tips for every budget, and so much more. Don't miss a single issue. Go to golftipsmag.com and subscribe today.
All right, welcome back, and I'm excited to be joined by tonight's guest, first time on the show, and I'll give him a quick introduction, and then we'll get him out here, and we've got lots to talk about tonight. So my special guest this evening is Terry Koehler. As I mentioned, he's the Chairman and Director of Innovation at Edison Golf. He's been, for over 30 years, he's focused his design energies on the needs of recreational golfers, not tour professionals. And if you've been fortunate enough to play wedges or irons by Reed Lockhart, Eidolon, Score, or most recently the Ben Hogan TK wedges and Fort Worth irons, then you know his work. Since '92, his patented Koehler sole was the first and still the only wedge sole to combine both a high and low bounce into each wedge to make them versatile from any kind of lie and any swing pass. So please welcome this evening's guest, Terry Koehler. Good evening, Terry. Welcome to Golf Talk Live.
Hi, Ted. It's very nice to be here with you tonight.
Well, I appreciate you taking time out of your evening and to join me, and I'm looking forward to tonight's discussion, learning a little bit more about Edison and some of the great wedges that you've been putting together for the last several years. Before we get into that, though, what I want to talk about just for a few moments is just a little bit about not so much your business background as far as in the golfing industry, but how you sort of first came about. I like to do that with first-time guests, just sort of how did you first get introduced to the game, and talk a little bit about your journey and what you found to be the most enjoyable part of golf.
Well, I always tell people that I don't even remember life before golf, Ted. I was very blessed to grow up in a family. Your older audience members will appreciate it when I tell them that I grew up in Mayberry with Ozzie and Harriet. So
right.
I had an idyllic childhood. That little small town in South Texas, that little 9-hole golf course was the center of a lot of what we did. And there was very little golf on TV. This is in the 50s and 60s when I was a youngster, and so we had our local stars and Cliff Gipps and Charlie Papacek and these guys that could hit the ball a mile at the old Persimmon and Balata and scored on those little 9-hole golf courses. And my dad was a very good player, and so I was just blessed to learn the game from the time I could stand up and hold on to a golf club. I really don't remember not playing. I don't remember life before I was, going around that golf course with a 2-wood and a 5-iron and a 9-iron and a putter and my little bag and grew from there. And back then, even our little 9-hole course had a PGA golf professional, and Carl Gustafson, or Pro as we all called him, shaped a bunch of us juniors, and I was with one of my high school buddies just the other day. We happen to belong to the same club now at 70 years old. And we reminisced about how wonderful it was to grow up, because that little 9-hole course was our personal playground. And there's still a lot of us that play, mid to high single-digit golf in our late 60s and 70s because of the instruction we had. So it was a great blessing. Kind of my orientation to the equipment, my dad was real big on whether it was our fishing or our bird hunting or our deer hunting or golf, is really understanding, how the tools work. And we took our fishing reels apart, our golf clubs, we rewrapped leather grips, and we waxed those persimmon heads, and we cleaned those irons and scrubbed those grips. And so my dad was a believer in getting hugely immersed in whatever you do. And I guess that manifested in me as I was always the little kid that took my toys apart to see how they worked. And most of the time I could get them back together. I guess I got better and better at that. So that was really my formative years. I was playing low single-digit golf by the time I was 14 or 15. And again, this was on little 9-hole golf courses. I wasn't, and I think it was really a blessing. I didn't grow up on a big fancy country club or whatever, but after college, I got a marketing degree, and I tried a few things and ended up in the ad agency business, and then started my own. And I was in San Antonio, Texas, which was where the home of Ray Cook Putters was, and went and made a sales call on them and got the Ray Cook Putter account, and that kind of launched me into the golf industry. And I would spend more time in the back of the shop, seeing why they did things than I probably should have as the ad guy, but it was a learning thing for me. And then I was very blessed to meet a lot of wonderful craftsmen from, the 70s and 80s and that era of golf equipment before, CAD design and before launch monitors, when it was pretty much seat of the pants and you learn by listening to golfers. So, a story could go on and on and on. I've been urged to write a book about my life in the golf industry, and maybe one of these days I'll do that. But I've just been really blessed with people that were willing to share with me what they knew about golf clubs and performance, and tour players that were willing to share with me, what they felt in a golf shot, what they wanted in a golf shot. And my inquisitive nature just has always driven me to learn more and learn more.
Yeah, and it's interesting when I listen to you and talking about not just playing the game, but actually really sort of diving into how things work. That's something that's obviously missing in today. Everything's become, through technology and robotics and all this kind of stuff, and you really don't have, people sort of digging into how things work and why they do what they do. So it promised me to ask you this question. As I mentioned in the intro, you've been 30 plus years, sort of working and focusing on the design and so forth of really helping recreational golfers, which, God bless you for that, because everything nowadays seems to be more focused on the tours. And there's nothing wrong with that, but, the rest of the folks out there need some help. So what has that 30 years experience taught you, particularly because we're going to get into this now, about the wedge game? What about the wedge game has, from your perspective, what has been wrong about it, I guess, is the best way to put it, and what have you learned about it through your endeavors over the years, working with other companies and now on your own, that has taught you about the wedge game? What's not right about it, and what could be right about it?
Well, one of the blessings of my childhood was I read a lot of golf books, and my dad encouraged me to read about golf architecture, golf history, and all that kind of thing. So I feel like I'm pretty versed in it. And I write a blog every week for one of the big online platforms. And so I interact with golfers a lot. I've been blessed to ever since I've been in the wedge business, I've always had an online wedge fitting experience, a protocol, interrogation, call it whatever you will. And I've seen what over 60,000 golfers have put in these profiles about what their challenges are. And I've had the good fortune to work with Tom Kite and Ben Crenshaw and Robert Wren and some wonderful, wonderful tour players that were very liberal and free with sharing what they knew. Now, I think the biggest thing about the wedge game is that, if you're 75 yards out from a green and you have the same shot that, the tour player has from 75 yards, and you've got the same shot that tour players had 10 years ago and 50 years ago, and Ben Hogan and Byron Nelson and Jimmy DeMeritt and on through Lee Trevino and Tom Watson and Nicklaus and Palmer. When you're 75 yards from the hole, what year it is doesn't really matter. Your objective is to hit the ball into the green with enough height and spin to make the ball do what you want it to do and end up close to the flag. And I think the biggest, the two biggest things that I just wrote about this last week is, first of all, this P club, as I call it, in your bag is no more a wedge than your 5-iron is. And, these clubs have now been cranked down to have a P or a W on them. They're cranked down to, 42, 43, 45 degrees. And you can't pitch the ball with loft and spin from 50 or 60 yards with a 42, 45 degree golf club. You need a club with 49, 50, 52, 53 degrees of loft to hit a true pitch shot. And there are places for that 44-degree golf club. One of the things I take great offense to is the numbering of golf clubs. And when I did the Ben Hogan Fort Worth irons, I put the loft number on the bottom of every iron because there's no such thing as an 8-iron. I mean, there's all kinds of different clubs that can have an 8 on the bottom, so there's no standard there. And it was just something I wanted to do from a measure of precision. We asked that of our wedges. What's the loft of that wedge? Well, why wouldn't we want to know that about our 8-iron and our 6-iron? So. Yeah. But in the wedge play, I think what the biggest change is, and I started out designing putters. I'm going to kind of ramble a little bit here. I hope you don't mind. But
no, that's fine. No, we got time.
In putter development, you have the design of putters, the evolving technique of putting, and what drives those two things, I think those two are interrelated. It's a chicken and egg thing. But what drives that is the continual acceleration of green speeds. I mean, when the USGA first kind of embraced the stimp meter, they went out in the 80s and stimped every like 500 golf courses around the country. And Oakmont,
right.
as we've all heard, was the fastest greens in the country at 9.7. 9.7. And now it's like they want these greens to be 11.5, 12, and 13. Well, if in the 80s Oakmont was 9.7, in the 40s it was probably 7, And so the technique that Hogan and Nelson and Snead and Bobby Jones before them, they were probably 4 in his day. These techniques changed from a wristy popping stroke to a more of an arm and shoulder stroke, and taking the hands more and more out of it as greens got, icier and icier. And as that happened, putter design caught up, and the shaft moved toward the center, and the ping answer and the zebra, and then into these big spaceship models. Putters are 2 ounces in the head heavier than they were when I started designing putters in the 80s, because the green speeds demanded that. And so I think if you look at that evolution, our game has evolved, in all areas. But in the wedge category, look at what drivers are today compared to, when I was in college, I was still hitting a persimmon driver all the way up into the late 80s, early 90s. It was the hardest club in the bag to master, and if you were a good driver of the ball, you really had an advantage. Well, the tide is reversed now. The driver is the easiest club in the bag to master. It's this big watermelon on the end of a shaft, and your ball sitting up on a tee. And it's pretty hard to miss a ball with a driver nowadays, like 4%. The problem is putting and chipping and wedge play has gotten to be the hardest part of the game, because the greens complexes are more diabolical, green speeds are faster, greens are firmer, and so it demands a lot of the wedge game. But if you look at wedges on the retail display, they really have not evolved like anything else in our golf bag. They haven't evolved like our shoes. They haven't evolved like our, even tees. Look at all the technology you see, whether it's meaningful or not, is an argument in the tees. And I used to say 20 years ago that the only thing in your bag with 50-year-old technology is your tees and your wedges, but I can't say that about tees anymore.
Right.
So, and wedges are just stagnant compared to the acceleration of technology and everything else. And for some reason, and, we'll go into the psychology of golfers, everybody wants to play this tour-validated wedge from one of the top 3 or 4 brands that has all the guys on tour, but yet nobody's trying to play their muscle-back blade. I mean, people realize, hey, I need to play a cavity back iron, and I need to have 2, 3, even 4 hybrids in my bag. But then I'm going and buying this tour wedge that is the most demanding club in the golf bag from a finicky perspective of forgiveness. And so it doesn't make any sense. And the big companies are focused on their tour players, their tour validation. And I think the amateur recreational golfer that plays to a 3 or a 5 or a 12 or a 20 handicap is greatly hampered by that. Those golf clubs wedges by nature are very hard to hit because of all the loft. Everything is kind of a glancing blow compared to, say, a 7-iron or a driver. And they're hard to master because of that. But then they put a heavy stiff steel shaft in them that nobody can handle, and then the weight is all on the bottom of the club, which requires a very precise strike on the 2nd, 3rd, 4th groove to get anything out of that golf club. And probably wedge skills are where we amateurs, even the best of us, even those that are blessed to play to a low single digit, we are further from a tour player. If you leave strength profile out, we're further from a tour player in our wedge play than any other part of our game. It's just the best wedge player in country club golf in America is probably not as good around the greens as the worst guy on the Korn Ferry Tour. It's just it's an art, and it takes dozens, hundreds, thousands of hours to get to Jordan Spieth's skill or Justin Thomas' skill or any of these guys. And they've done it with wedges over the last 15 years of their life. These guys are all, 28 to 35. They've been practicing wedge play since they were 7. And they've done it with wedges that really haven't changed very much. So their learning is cumulative, whereas the drivers they're playing now are nothing like the drivers they had 15 years ago. The ball they're playing now is nothing like the ball they played. But the wedges are almost identical. And I think that is a real problem for the recreational golfers, because nobody's out there saying, you've got these nice cavity back irons that let you get away with shots. you need some wedges that let you get away with shots. And that's been my driving force for 30 years in the wedge category. How do I give you the versatility, the forgiveness, the distance consistency without compromising those little touch skill shots that you've learned? Hopefully you've learned.
Yeah, and you know what's in? I just want to add in there real quick because you'd mentioned Tom Kite and that earlier. I remember when watching some of the older videos that he did in instruction and so forth, and he was one of the first ones that I remember talking about having 4 wedges in the bag, and once that was sort of opened up, everybody started adding more wedges. And from a tour player standpoint, I can understand that because as you just very eloquently explained, they've worked at it for a long time. But when I start seeing a lot of amateurs that have got 2, 3, and 4 wedges in their bag, and they're having troubles hitting one, it just it's effective marketing is what it is that's done that. And I want to ask you this question because I was reading some things obviously to prepare for tonight, and you made a comment and you said that a lot of the wedges that are out there have insufficiency built in. Explain what you mean by that so that the listeners understand.
So when you look at a conventional wedge, and if you go through the rack, and if you can kind of close your eyes to the graphics from one brand to the other brand to the other brand, there's a remarkable similarity between the wedges from brand A, brand B, brand C, brand D, brand E. All the weight is along the bottom, and the top 2/3 of the club is very thin because of all that weight on the bottom. And the tour player, when you look at the face of the tour player's wedge, you see a wear pattern about the size of a penny, and it's centered right about the 3rd or 4th groove, very low in the club. But if you look at a recreational golfer's wedges, you see if they've had their wedges for some period of time, you can see a wear pattern that's about the size of $50, and it's centered up at the 5th or 6th or 7th groove, even if he's a pretty good player, he or she.
Yeah.
And these tour design wedges have a tremendous efficiency down on that 3rd groove because that's where all the mass is. But when you move impact up another 1/2 inch to the 5th or 6th groove, then you look at that club, it's very thin from there all the way up to the top of the blade. So there's no meat behind where the ball is. It's the same club, but the mass is not right behind the point of impact. And one of the illustrations I've and this is kind of cavity back iron kind of thing too, but it really applies to wedges more. If you think about a hammer, a carpenter's hammer, I mean, there hasn't been any significant changes to that product in 500 years, 400 years.
Right.
A claw hammer is a claw hammer. A sledgehammer is a sledgehammer. And if you take a claw hammer, it drives a nail. If you take pneumatic air guns and stuff out of the equation, there's really nobody's ever made a better way to drive a nail than that claw hammer. And but if you take that claw hammer and you turn it on its side and you strike the nail where the hammer and the handle meet, it's very inefficient. If everybody's probably done that, but it's very inefficient. Yep. Well, it's the same hammer. It's the same amount of mass in the head of that hammer. It's the same you swinging that hammer. And yet, because the mass is not in line with the impact point, the efficiency, the smash factor, if you will, to use a golf equivalent term, is tremendously compromised. And so even on your best strikes hit up around the 5th or 6th groove and you think that's center face, you're losing 8 to 10 to 12% of the impact efficiency, smash factor, that the tour player is getting by hitting it down on that 3rd groove. And when it goes up even higher in the face, the ball's sitting in the rough, and everybody knows you hit that wedge shot, you feel it out toward the toe, you feel it high in the face. Before you even look up, you know it's going to be in the bunker. It's not going to get there. It's going to drop in the pond. It's going to drop in the bunker. I mean, we all know that shot, right? Yep. Well, that's built into the golf club. There's no mass up there behind impact, and so that ball launches high with minimal spin. It has reduced ball speed. I mean, it's physically impossible to get to its target because all the efficiencies were missed on that shot. And I've always said, well, you can get them on the air. You've got a lot of loft on these golf clubs. Let's rearrange the mass to where there is more meat behind that mid-face shot and that high-face shot. And then what happens with that is another golf equipment term comes in called gear effect. And gear effect is at play in every golf club. And so if you look at what we've done with drivers, the holy grail is high launch, low spin, right? And we've gotten there by putting all the weight as far in the bottom of the club as we can get it. Well, where is all the weight on your wedge? It's as far in the bottom of the club as it can be put. So by nature, even if you leave loft out of the equation, by design, a wedge wants to launch the ball high with minimal spin. But yet every golfer is trying to figure out how to get a penetrating trajectory with maximum spin. You're fighting the golf club. You've got to learn how to hit those wedges down around the third and nearly blading it to get the maximum efficiency out of that golf club. So my question is, you can either go spend thousands of hours to try to learn how to hit it on the third groove, or you can just buy a golf club that's engineered around the way you hit your wedges, which is up toward the middle of the face.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's very interesting the analogy that you made between the better players and the rest of us out here.
Sorry, I lost you.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Hello.
Yep. Hi, are you able to hear me now, Terry?
I lost you there for a minute. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. So it was very interesting what you were saying about the differences between some of the better players and obviously most high handicap or amateurs in that the pattern on the wedge for the tour players is quite small, and as you said, down around the second, third, and maybe even fourth groove, whereas the higher handicap is further up the club face. So what is it that, just to sort of so that people understand, what are the tour players doing differently, using the same equipment the rest of us are, that's causing them to hit it? Are they hitting down on it more? Is there something that they're doing differently than the rest of the people to get that different dispersion pattern?
Absolutely. They're practicing their wedges 40 and 50 hours a week, and we're not.
Right.
I mean, striking any golf ball with precision and consistency is a skill thing, and these guys make a living, all day playing golf. I mean, they work on their wedge games incessantly. You watch the PGA this week. I mean, these guys are going to be exhibiting some real magic around the greens because they're going to have to. And these green complexes are going to be more challenging. But, at the Masters last month, you watch the magical stuff these guys do, and it's because they go out and spend 2, 3, 4 hours every day doing nothing but hitting those little wedge shots and finding 80 different ways to hit it 35 feet, and the rest of us, we go hit a bucket of balls if we either don't practice at all, or we may hit, 40 balls before we go to the first tee to warm up. But how many people do you see out there, taking 3 buckets of balls and hitting 200 or 300 little soft wedge shots just to learn how to do that better? You just don't see recreational golfers do that. We don't have the time and we don't have the interest to do that. But to those guys, when you look at the guys making their living, there are thousands of really good ball strikers. And there are hundreds that are making their living on some level of the tour. And there are dozens that are doing it really well. And it's all about, your mental aptitude and all that. But it's about how hard do you work at it? I mean, playing golf at the highest level, where it's LPGA, PGA, Korn Ferry, European Tour, playing golf at the highest level is not a hobby. This is a full-time job.
No.
Just like you have your full-time job and I have mine, and your listeners all have their full-time job. And, we're not going to ever have tour player skills with a wedge because it requires massive amounts of time. So rather than try to figure out how do I learn how to hit wedges like a tour player, and I've written a lot of tips about how to improve your ball striking with wedges. And there are some great little secrets of that. But, the USGA had the campaign before Arnold Palmer passed of, swing your swing. We all have a swing that we kind of brought to the party, and most people are not going to go to the instruction to go rebuild their whole golf game. So we're playing cavity back irons, we're playing hybrids, we're, experimenting with different drivers. We're going to find that bag of equipment that helps us be the best we can be with what we're bringing to the party. And my wedges are designed to be part of that team that you have in your golf bag. And we look at the short end of the set as very different than the middle of the set. And those clubs over 37, 40 degrees aloft, these are your money clubs, whether you're playing on the PGA Tour or whether you're playing to break 90 or 100, you're going to do it by being good or better with your clubs in the high loft range. And, you know, and because people don't think about the fact that, you know, how many shots inside 100 yards do you take in a round of golf, not counting putts? You know, and it's going to probably be somewhere in the 13 to 15 range of all different kinds of shots. And it might be 17 or 20, depending on your handicap, more than you hit your driver. And drivers are a lot easier to figure out how to hit than wedges are. So, and I tell people all the time, say, how do I get a better wedge game? I said, for every driver you hit on the range, hit 100 wedge shots. That's how you get there.
Yep.
But
no,
also
you're exactly right.
A wedge, that's more forgiving.
Yeah, and that brings us into, you know, Edison Golf, and I want to talk about you guys just recently launched back, I believe in March, the Edison 2.0 wedge and design, and I want to first go back to your earlier design. What's the difference between the earlier design you had a few years ago? What changes have you made in the new version that's coming out, or the updated version, if you will, the 2.0? So talk about your earlier wedges that Edison came out with, I think in 2020, I believe, and what was unique about those particular designs, and then talk about the new one that just came out earlier this year, some of the things, the changes that you made, and why you made those changes.
Well, as you mentioned in your very eloquent and very nice introduction, I've been doing wedges for 30 years, and I've always pursued this idea of how do I make a wedge that's forgiving and versatile and allows you to optimize whatever shot-making skills you bring to the table. And we all have a different skill set, right? So after I did the Hogan thing and took a little powder for about 2 years, kind of recharged my batteries, and I started writing my blog for golfwrx.com. And no sooner than I started doing that, people that have played my wedges said, hey, when are you going to do wedges again? And I couldn't come up with a reason not to, so I started working on this idea in about 2018 of what haven't I done yet? You know, I've pushed the envelope to this level, but how far can I push the envelope? And I started working on prototypes, and that ended up being the original Edison Forged. Had a very modest amount of perimeter weighting, but the main thing is it was so much thicker above the fourth and fifth groove. We had 32% more mass in the club head above that fourth or fifth groove than anybody out there. Even though all of them were kind of thickening the top half of their blade, I'm very flattered by that because they're almost where I was with my Reed Lockhart designs in the mid-'90s, but not quite. They're nowhere close to where I am now. And so as soon as that club was on the market and Edison is a real company, I'm a tinkerer. I'm always playing around with, you know, machining and grinding and lead tape and welding material and, you know, can I make this even better, make it even better? And I pushed myself to go past what probably is real, and I came back. And so the 2.0 Edison, the primary improvement is we moved another 17 to 19 grams of mass up above your probable point of impact. So we're getting, and we shaved a little bit of mass right behind your point of impact, so we created a little more efficient sweet spot, if you will, around that fifth groove. But we move mass above the fifth groove, which helps bring trajectory down, brings your landing angle is steeper because of this. Your launch angle is shallower. Your spin rates are higher. And when I test wedges, I don't look at perfect shots. I want, 50 shots off of the golf club all over the face. What real golf represents. And then I want to look at the averages. I want to look at the extremes. What was my long, short extreme? What was my high, low extreme on launch angles? That's what I'm always looking for is, every golf club has one perfect spot to make contact. Whether it's a driver, a wedge, a putter, every club's got one. There's no such thing as a big sweet spot. There is a pinpoint sweet spot in every golf club. And then what we try to do is mitigate the deterioration of performance as impact moves away from that point. So what I did is try to get a larger effective zone that would put you reasonable proximity to the hole. I did a few little refinements on my patented sole that I created in the early 90s. it's the most versatile sole in golf, and I've long been a heretic when this whole notion of bounce fitting. We can come back into the sole design, because that's what most people think of wedges no more than the sole design, and that's very far from true. And then we modified our plating a little bit to get a little better moisture resistance. And then one of the big changes we made in our build is we went to we had always worked with the parallel tip shafts from KBS, and we moved to their taper tip selection after quite a bit of experimenting. We feel like this gives us a little higher level of performance. I'm always going to be pursuing higher levels of performance. So, these just got introduced, but I've got things in my workbench that may never come to market. They may come to market in a year or two or three, who knows? But that's the fun of doing what I do for a living. I always get to keep tinkering and exploring and experimenting. And, there was our namesake, Thomas Edison, that we created that when we created the company. And somebody asked him one time about another one of his light bulb experiments that failed. And they said, do these failures bother you? He goes, oh, they're not failures. I'm just creating more and more ways not to get the results I want, So, and it's very interesting. And so that's inspiring. He had another really wonderful saying that I didn't know this. A close friend and business partner was a big fan of Thomas Edison because he's an engineer. And Thomas Edison had a great saying. It's like, when you've exhausted all the possibilities, remember this: you haven't.
Right.
Pretty wise.
Well said. Yeah, for sure.
So,
that's what.
Yeah, and so, I think that, the 2.0 is an incremental improvement on the original Edison Forge. All golf clubs are an incremental improvement, hopefully, on what came before. I will never just introduce a model because I'm tired of looking at the old one, which the big companies have to. There's only so many ways you can reinvent the wheel, and when you're on the pressure of a new model every 18 months or a new model every 12 or 24 months, you're under pressure. It's like if you invented something 6 months after your current model was introduced, you got to wait because that's the marketing cycle. Don't pay any attention to marketing cycles. And, the Edison forged wedges, and by our testing, there's only one wedge on the market better than our original wedge, and that's our new one. Our original wedge still outperforms everything on the market today by our testing. So, I'm trying to improve on it always. But I'm not held back by what tour players want. And those guys are finicky. Those guys can feel things you can barely measure. And that's not who I serve. I've let, Bob Vokey's a brilliant guy, got a great team with him. Roger Cleveland, known him since way back in the 80s. These guys, there are just so many talented people out there. But mainly, most of them are focused on the tour player, and that's just not my guy. He's fine. He's well taken care of. Those guys can have them all they want. I'm trying to get the 12 handicapper to break 80 for the first time, or whatever the goal may be.
Yeah, and you raise a really interesting point because, when you look at where handicaps are for the everyday golfer, they've barely budged in the last several decades. Because the fact that the others are really not focusing on the everyday golfer, they're focusing on the tour players, and who of course are shooting better scores and playing better and so forth. But the regular guys out there have not seen a lot of improvement. They're playing. It's not exactly the same, but they're playing similar equipment to what the pros are playing. Obviously not as successfully, but they're not reaping the benefits out of it. They're not actually really improving as much as what they're being led to believe. And, like you, I would much rather, have a product. You want something that certainly looks good, but if that's all it offers from what you had last season, I see guys out every season. When the new driver comes out, it's in their bag. And, when I teach for a living, I'm a golf professional, so I teach, lessons and that. And I see the same people all the time coming out with the new equipment, and I say, look, Bob, why if you got a new driver in your bag, you still can't hit the one you had from last season? but it's all marketing. We could go down a rabbit hole so deep with that discussion, and I may have to have you back, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But I want to talk about your wedges and give you some good opportunities to talk about that. But so, Terry, in your new wedge, the 2.0, you're using what you refer to as a 5-step forging process. How does that help? What is it and what do you mean by 5-step forging?
So the forging process, since I've been doing golf clubs, and I've done cast golf clubs and I've done forged golf clubs, and 30 years ago, forging was a relatively crude process that required a tremendous amount of handwork. Like when I was involved with Hogan in the 90s, a 5-iron may come in out of the foundry that makes the raw club head. It may come in at 400 grams of weight, but they have to polish and machine and grind and do everything to get that 5-iron down to 235 grams. So, they were removing, 40% of the mass of this raw forging. Well, with this, the forging, across the board, forging techniques have gotten so much better that with this 5-step forging process, that final forging is as close to a finished golf club as can possibly be made by the forging process. And so other than the weight loss of machining and drilling out the hosel for the shaft, there's only 8-9 grams of weight removed from that club. That forging is so perfect because of the 5-step process. So the first process starts with a bar of steel, and then this 800, there's a series of 5 production tools, and this bar is superheated, and it goes from one tool to the next, to the next, to the next, and it's pounded into shape repeatedly so that when it comes out of that last tool, it's very clearly the golf club head you're going to buy. And then we've got to machine grooves and faces and all that to get the precision. But the 5-step forging process, because this club is going through that many processes, as you can imagine, this piece of metal has been hit 5 different times sequentially with an 800-ton press. The molecules are so compressed together, which they aren't in a cast golf club, but they're compressed together so much there's just this beautiful, solid firm feel of the ball coming off the club. And, every golf shot is kind of an expression of everything you learned before. So getting really good feedback to your hands of how the ball came off the club is what the learning process is all about, particularly in your short game and putting. Every putt is filling your memory banks with that stroke produced that feel which went that far, So we believe it's the best way to make a golf club, a precision golf club. It's considerably more expensive than casting clubs like the big companies do. Some people would argue there's no difference, but that's a personal matter. I think if you hit our golf club and against any of the other clubs out there, most people will tell us they can feel the difference because of this solid feel. And the golf club is shaped differently, and so that shot hit a little high on the face feels a lot more solid than it does with the wedge that's in your bag right now. And talking to your listeners at large, you're playing a tour design wedge, but you've got some cavity back irons, and nobody in the PGA Championship this week is playing the iron you're playing, and you're not playing the shafts they play, but you're out there trying to play the wedge they play. And, my advice is, hey, try something different. Unless you're a brilliant wedge player and you don't want it to get any better, then why not try something different? We have a unique program out that no, premium golf club has. We'll build you a wedge. We'll build it for you. Have your specifications for length and angle. Pick whichever loft of our line you want, and we'll build it to you and go play it a month. Go play 2 or 3, 5 rounds of golf with it. You're going to find yourself getting away with things that you're going to go, wow, I didn't hit that very good, but man, it made the front of the green. And that's what it's all about, is distance consistency. If you're 92 yards and you think you know how to hit the shot 92 yards, if you miss the perfect sweet spot by a half an inch, I think you still ought to get 88 or 89 yards out of it instead of 75.
Yeah, no, I agree. And you're so right. I mean, people are looking for clubs that offer forgiveness. I mean, again, if you're not able to get out there and play on a regular basis like obviously the pros do, you want to know that your equipment is going to, sort of catch the fall occasionally for you. And what happens is with a lot of the equipment that you're buying, and you're exactly right, and I understand, I'm not saying it to knock, the competitors out there to what you're offering, but the truth of the matter is it all comes down to, as I said earlier, the marketing. And a lot of the equipment, same with the drivers, it's driven me nuts for years, and I've said this to most of the people that I've taught, is I don't care who makes the driver, what it's made out of. If you can't use the club properly, it's not going to make a difference. This 10, 20, 30 extra yards, it doesn't make a difference if you don't know how to put the club face on the ball correctly. So, I mean, I've seen people, getting a 20, 30-year-old driver out and go against the new one, and you give it to the new one to an amateur that can't make good solid contact, and the guy that can make good contact hits that old 20, 30-year-old driver that's been kicking around, and he outdrives him every time. And that's because he knows how to use the equipment. But, for some of the golfers out there that struggle, particularly with their wedges, you need that forgiveness. And the truth of the matter is, as you said earlier, a lot of the stuff that's out there right now really does not do that. So you mentioned about fitting and getting them to try that out. So is there a fitting process? What does the consumer need to do to ensure a proper fit?
So we have an online interactive experience, for lack of a term, we call the wedge fit scoring range analysis. And it's basically it's a questionnaire that we interact with you to learn about, what kind of you're playing, what kind of distances, what kind of trajectories. We're learning a lot about your game. The same things you would ask as an instructor or you would observe
right.
With your guy. We don't get to do that. And my big thing on wedge fitting is if you have a set of irons that you're reasonably comfortable with, I want to blend the wedges to those irons. I don't want to match the irons exactly, but I want to blend them. I want to get a loft sequencing that makes sense for your gapping. I want to get a shaft in your wedges that's of a similar weight, maybe slightly softer flex than what's in your irons, because you're used to those irons. And the main thing is to get the weight right and the material right. If you're playing a 70-gram R-Flex graphite in your irons and you go buy one of the top brand wedges off the shelf with a 130-gram stiff flex steel shaft, you cannot make the same swing with those two golf clubs. They're 2 ounces difference in weight, and you can't make the same swing. I went recently, I played 80-gram graphite in my irons and wedges, KBS. I'm a big KBS fan. And I went for an anonymous wedge fitting at one of the big retailers a week or two ago just to see how they approached it. I walked in, and didn't have any of my stuff in my bag. And, the guy was having me go through. He didn't even ask me, what are you playing in your irons? He goes, let's hit some wedges. I got 4 of them here. Well, they all have a 115 to 130 gram stiff shaft, and I hit a reasonable number of balls in a week. But, I hit 20, 25 balls with each of these wedges. And after 100 shots, I'm getting fatigued because I'm swinging 2 ounces more weight with every swing than I'm used to with my wedges. And I'm 71 and blessed with good health, but still, 2 ounces times 100 swing, that's a lot. So, I believe you first thing you look at the golfer's bag and say, hey, how do you like these irons? Were they custom fitted? How long have you played them? And if that person is comfortable with those, then I'm going to blend the wedges to them. And maybe we want a hair heavier wedge shaft, and it depends on the player. I think one of the things I think a lot of amateur golfers suffer in their short games, particularly greenside, is if these guys on the PGA Tour, who are all gym rats, right? These guys they're athletes. They are physical specimens. And if they're hitting all these little shots around the green with a wedge with a 130-gram shaft in it, you don't have a chance to hit those same shots with your hamstring because you couldn't get in an arm wrestling contest with Brooks Koepka. Sorry, you're not going to win, right? And so if you you've lightened your irons up to get more clip-head speed, you've lightened your wedges down to that same range where the irons are so that you have a chance to manipulate these wedges. I had a few Division II collegiate women players a while back, a couple of months ago. Well, I guess it was January before their season got going. Their coach brought them over. And these girls they're not, top level D1 athletes, but, they're talented players. They're shooting mid to high 70s at a D2 school. And, these girls, kind of gap wedge range for them is about 80 yards. And they're all trying to swing these 130-gram off-the-shelf, brand A, brand B, brand C wedges. And I said, let me put something in your hands that's closer matched to what you've got in your irons. And they were just blown away by all of a sudden they could do things they couldn't do with that other golf club because they didn't have the hand strength to manipulate that golf club properly. So I'm a big believer in weight matching. And then you get the line angles right. I think your line angles and your wedges should be 1 to 2 degrees flatter than your irons. And I think that's a general rule of thumb that applies across the board. PGA Tour players do it because it works, so let's take a cue from something that works. So, and then the fitting thing is, you're a golf professional, so fitting is part science, part art. And, I think the launch monitor is less an influence in wedge fitting than it is in, say, getting the right driver or 5-iron. And one of the offenses I take to the fitting world is that fitting bay is full of 7-irons that are 28, 29-degree golf clubs. And if they're going to find you the 7-iron that goes the longest and hopefully it's straightest for you, and they're going to build you a whole set of irons on that. Well, then they're going to try to sell you this P club and this A wedge and whatever they're going to call it. And that club is 20 degrees, different from that 7-iron that you tested. And if you go 20, you only have to go 15 degrees the other way from that 7-iron, and you got your driver. Well, nobody ever fit a driver off of a 7-iron fitting. But how can you fit a pitching wedge off of a 7-iron fitting? It's 15 degrees different. So you bring that up, people, they don't want to talk to you about it. But they're not going to let you hit those wedges. And set match wedges, I think it's just it's a wrong thing to do. The technology that makes a good 28-degree golf club does not make a good 50-degree golf club.
I couldn't agree more. And it all boils down to this: is you want the golfers to see improvement. You want and I'm not talking tour, but I'm talking the everyday golfer. And I think a lot of the times that the industry is almost stacked up against the everyday golfer because they're not producing equipment that's really truly helping them as much as they're led to believe. And I've said this many times on the show, and I mentioned it a few moments ago, is it bothers me. I went to the PGA show this past January, and again, they're schlepping out, something new here and there, and it's the same stuff, just a different, package and calling it something different, but basically it's the same thing. Maybe the materials are slightly different, but it's essentially the same thing. And I look at it, now you're wanting people to spend $500, $600, $700, $800 for a brand new driver when they can't hit the one they've had, for the last several years. And that bothers me because this is why you get so many people, unfortunately, turning away. So, well, I think
Harry, you as a golf professional is a real secret to improvement. And, and there is merit to good equipment, but, good technique sure makes up for a lot of ill too. And that's the business you're in. And, one of the things we get about our wedges is, wow, these don't look anything like anybody else's wedges. And I said, absolutely not. And the Ping Answer didn't look like anybody else's putter. And the TaylorMade Tour Preferred Metalwood didn't look like anybody's persimmon. And Big Bertha didn't look like anybody's metalwood. And the first hybrids didn't look like anybody's 3-iron. If you want to change the performance of a golf club in a big way, you have to change the shape and the look and the way that club is configured in a big way. It's just like, nobody's going to engineer a pickup that can hang with a Maserati on a speed race because you can't make a pickup work like that. It just doesn't work. By the same token, nobody ever made a great off-road Maserati, but I think that form follows function, and in our world, it's probably the biggest truism is form follows function, and the function I'm after is penetrating trajectories, forgiving of your mishits, and a soul that can handle any lie that you come up against in a round of golf. And we really haven't talked about the soul much, but this whole bounce and grind conundrum has got people so confused. You probably run into that in your teaching all the time.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. That's a whole other show. We'll have Terry. I'm going to have you come back on again, and we'll continue this discussion. But unfortunately, we have to wrap it up. But I want to let the folks know tuning into the program that if they go to your website, edisonwedges.com, they can take a look at everything there. But also, they can do the fitting and interact, as you said, right there online. So they don't even have to step out of their home. They can just get online and go through the process there. So if you go to edisonwedges.com, all of what we've been talking about and much more is available on Terry's website. But Terry, I want to thank you for coming on, and I really enjoyed our discussion, and I appreciate what you do is you make you're helping to make our job as teacher professionals that much easier by really speaking the truth. And again, this is not I'm not suggesting that we're knocking what else is out there. But I think, education is a very important thing for golfers, and I think that, it's, we all want to sell and do this and do that, but the truth of the matter is we want to see improvement with our students, and we want to make sure they're getting the right clubs in their hand. And it sounds like, you put a lot of heart into what you do, and obviously take and put a lot of passion into it as well, and I can hear it in our discussion tonight. So I want to thank you for doing that and not, going down the road that so many others have done in the past and just, go about the sales. You're actually trying to make some changes and improve people's enjoyment of the game, and that's really what it's all about. We want to, bring more people into the game, but more importantly, we want to keep them here in the game, and the only way to do that is to be truthful with them and say, hey, this is something I think that you need to take a serious look at. But Terry, I want to thank you for joining me tonight on Golf Talk Live, and I will definitely make arrangements to have you come back on and share some more great insight to Edison Golf.
That'd be great. I'd love to do it. It seems like the hour just flew by. Hope it did for your listeners as well. And I'd love to come back on and we get into the whole topic of grooves and grinds, which is the other part of the wedge conundrum.
Well, we will have a part 2 to this show, and I look forward to having you on. But Terry, thank you very much for joining me tonight on Golf Talk Live, and I will reach out to the appropriate parties, and we'll make that happen here before too long. But have a great weekend. Enjoy the PGA, and keep doing the great stuff that you're doing. And again, go to edisonwedges.com and check out their line of great wedges and get yourself fitted properly. Thank you very much, Terry, for your time.
It was fun.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right, that was Terry Koehler, Chairman and Director of Innovation at Edison Golf. And again, go to edisonwedges.com as their website, and you can do everything, including get fitted for your Edison wedges. And their 2.0 wedge is a lot of good information on that. And we'll get into some more information the next time, but it's hard to get all of that technical stuff down in just an hour show. But I think we gave you certainly, hopefully, a taste of what Terry's doing at Edison, and you can check it out and learn a little bit more, for yourselves. But again, go to edisonwedges.com. All right. Also, special thanks to the guys earlier, John Decker and Jim Endicott, for joining me on the Coaches Corner panel. Appreciate your input, guys, always, and I look forward to having you guys back on a future panel together. On that note, have a great weekend, everybody. Enjoy this weekend's golf. Get out yourself and play and practice, and hopefully the tips that we gave you on the Coaches Corner panel tonight will help you produce a more enjoyable game. I know I'm going to try to get out there and hit a few balls myself and maybe get a few holes in. But have a great weekend, everybody. God bless, and I will see you next time right here on Golf Talk Live.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoyed this week's broadcast of Golf Talk Live. We'd like to thank this week's Coaches Corner panel, and a special thank you to tonight's guest. Remember to join Ted every Thursday from 6 to 8 p.m. Central on Golf Talk Live. And be sure to follow Ted on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you're interested in being a guest on Golf Talk Live, send Ted an email at ted.golftalklive@gmail.com. This has been a production of the iGolf Sports Network.